1970s are remembered as decade of disco and afro hairstyles. It was when Watergate scandal for the first time truly undermined Americans' faith in government. It was the most liberated, free spiritual decade in our history that sadly might never happen again. If you grew up during the 1970s, or even if you weren't that lucky like myself, here are some of the many things worth remembering. YellowTree, wonderful weekend! 1970s kids had this amount of freedom which from today's perspective looks more like near-death experiences. Kids weren't supervised by their parents everywhere they went. Parents would instead call their neighbors on a barbecue while discussing trending topics like Vietnam War.
The negotiations which will lead to peace in Vietnam.
You didn't need a smartphone back then to call your friends. Instead, you were just searching for bicycles thrown next to the road. That's where you knew your friends were. Kids would build ramps and perform crazy stunts with their bicycles without wearing any helmets. When getting thirsty, you would drink water from the nearest neighbor's garden tap. Sometimes boys would run into the woods and look at the stash of Playboys they hid in there. Bigger groups of children would play the game called Red Rover on a playground. This game was played by dividing players into two teams, forming a chain by holding hands some distance apart. Team A player calls player Billy from the Team B by yelling Red Rover, send Billy right over, and Billy from the Team B tries to break the Team A's chain. If Billy fails to break through his rival's chain, then he has to join their team. If Billy succeeds, then he has to choose one of two people whose link got broken to join his team. Team left with only one player wins the game. 70s had the most eye-catching interior designs, which you might still experience by entering your grandmother's house. From the huge colorful shag carpets to the wood paneling walls, which weren't actually made out of the real wood, but from plywood or pressed fiberboard that was designed to look like a real wood. Even the station wagons popular in the 70s had the vinyl woody siding, which was at least more creative than the boring black colors of today. If wood paneling wasn't an option, then funky geometric shaped wallpapers were filling the entire walls. Televisions were almost camouflaged inside the wooden furniture. Linoleum flooring was very popular material in the 70s kitchens and bathrooms. During the female rights movement, more women were entering the workforce, so linoleum was much loved by every 70s housewife, being very durable and easier to clean. 70s fashion was all about individuality, as Wook proclaimed, there are no rules in the fashion game now. Early 70s were pretty much a continuation of 60s hippies look that popularized bell-bottom pants, hot pants, leisure suits, tie-dye shirts, ponchos, and more. Farrah Fawcett was one of the most influential fashion icons of the 70s. While boys loved putting her famous poster on their bedroom wall, girls wanted to have her feathered and perfect hairstyle. Afro was definitely the grooviest 70s hairstyle. In the second half of the 70s, disco exploded and took over fashion. The color palette started having more earthy tones in browns, tan, and light blues. Disco fashion styles for women were tube tops, sequin dress, cardigans, pantsuits, and Daisy Dukes. Main disco style for men included the three-piece suits, like the one worn by John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever. Men's alternative to disco was sportswear, which included jumpsuits, puffer vests, and love-top sneakers. Definitely the weirdest fashion trend that stood out the most were the giant 8-inch platform shoes worn by both women and men. Before emojis took over the world, you had the mood rings, invented in 1975. Mood rings were worn on a finger, and the color of the liquid-filled glass stone represented the state of your emotions. Apparently, crystals changed colors as a response to the changes in your hand's temperature. Black color meant you were serious, intense, and mysterious. Blue stood for calm and relaxed, green for average, normal mood, yellow for tense and excitement, and violet blue for happiness and romance. If a violet blue color appeared on the ring of a person you were talking to, it meant that she or he was in love with you. So you could pay only $19.95 to figure out if somebody had a crush on you. Pet rock. Ridiculous as it sounds, this collectible toy made its creator Gary Doll a millionaire. This 70s fad lasted about 6 months, during which Doll sold 1.5 million pet rocks for $4 each. Yeah, he became a millionaire by selling rocks. Buying rocks costed him only 1 cent, but his biggest expense was manufacture of the boxes with ventilation holes. Cause, you know, rocks need to breathe too, right? Pet rock owners will get a 32-page training manual to teach their new pets how to stay, lay down, sit, and attack. Well, that one with some help of the owner. 1976 was a year that marked America's 200th birthday. Advertisements weren't obsessed with being politically correct like nowadays. Instead, every single advertisement promoted patriotism on lighters, candies, airplanes, cars, t-shirts, and weapons. Back then, political parties weren't so polarized, and every American proudly embraced patriotism wearing red, white, and blue. America's 300th birthday will be in 2076, but fellow Americans, get ready for the United States semi-Bicentennial year on July 4th, 2026. American cars were oversized thirsty gas guzzlers until the fuel prices skyrocketed thanks to the 1973 oil crisis. Suddenly, people were lining up at the gas stations waiting for hours sometimes. Angry drivers were impatiently horning each other, fistfights would break out, and sometimes fuel was getting even stolen around the neighborhoods. If this didn't inspire screenplay for Mad Max, then what did? Federal officials reduced the national speed limit to 55 miles per hour. Fuel shortages forced American car manufacturers to create downsized and more fuel-efficient cars. Some of the results were Chevy Nova, Dodge Dart, Ford Maverick, or Ford Pinto. How the sales went? Well, Ford Pinto started exploding. No, literally exploding. Ford decided to sell new Pintos, even though crash tests showed that its flawed design would cause the gas tank to explode if the car was hit from behind. Apparently, for Ford it was cheaper to pay off the possible lawsuits of the crash victims than pay for the car new parts. 8-track tape was the first piece of technology that offered people listening to music albums in their own car. It was released in 1964 by American Lear Industries Company, a year after the first cassette tape was invented by the Dutch Philips Company. Ah, don't you miss those days when not everything was made in China? 8-track cartridges could play continuously in an endless loop and didn't have to be flipped over like cassette tapes to play all the songs. Instead, 8-track tape had 4 programs with couple of songs each. By pressing a button, listener could switch to another set of songs. 8-track cartridges' popularity peaked by 1978 from the booming automobile industry, but were later replaced by the smaller and more user-friendly audio cassette tapes. POW bracelets, short for Prisoners of War bracelet, were worn to show support for soldiers in Vietnam War. Each bracelet was engraved with a soldier's name and his date of capture. You weren't supposed to remove the bracelet until your soldier was found and released. Hitchhiking was a common practice if you needed a ride. During the free spirit of the 70s, teenagers with just a few dollars in their pockets traveled across the entire nation embracing the feelings of independence, excitement, and freedom. Experiences of being driven by a total stranger could end up just fine, but sometimes even deadly. A growing pattern of rapes and murders grew throughout the 70s, but people, specifically women, continued to tomb bride often from the same street where another girl hitched her way to death. It doesn't get more 70s than customized vans. Custom vans built by Ford, Chevrolet, Dodge, or Plymouth became the vehicles of self-expression. Teenagers back then used their vans to go on camping together, prepare barbecue, or visit numerous concerts. Spacious van interior allowed the kitschy, huge waterbeds, television, music installation, refrigerator, or even fireplace. You didn't have to buy a house after moving out of your parents' house. You could just buy a cargo van and turn it into your personal customized van. 70s couples sure had tons of fun inside those vans. Only God knows how much sweat got into those shag carpets. Waterbeds offered reduced physical stress and encouraged blood circulation. You could feel a beautiful, pleasurable feeling like you're floating on your back, unless the looming possibility of leaks kept you up at night. This advertisement says that 2 things are better in waterbed: One of them is sleep. Whoa, people seem to have been really obsessed with that second thing in the 70s. Waterbed peaked in the 1987 when more than 1 out of 5 mattresses purchased in America were all waterbeds. But the downsides to the waterbeds were that they were extremely heavy to move, had a risk of bursting and floating, and of course, you had to keep the water warm all the time. Star Wars remains the highest grossing film of the 70s, but what was the second most profitable 70s film? Let me give you a hint. It's about a woman with unusual birth defect of having clitoris located inside her throat, so she comes to a doctor for a solution. Deep Throat introduced mainstream society to pornography but was immediately banned in 23 states. According to its director Garrett Damiano, Deep Throat revenues were higher than $600 million. However, both films' female lead Linda Lovelace and her doctor, played by Harry Reams, were paid only $12,000. Deep Throat was financed by the Bryanston Distributing Company, which was at the time owned by the members of the Italian Colombo crime family. Director Garrett Damiano was unaware his film was being produced by Mafia. Later, he was forced out of the partnership. According to him, it was either never earning a coin from his own film or getting his legs broken by mobsters. Republican administration at the time, led by President Richard Nixon, was willing to obliterate the adult industry. Harry Reams became the first American actor to be prosecuted by the federal government for appearing in a film. Even mainstream celebrities admitted seeing the film, including Martin Scorsese, Jack Nicholson, Barbara Walters, and even Frank Sinatra. Low-budget adult movies were so successful that they were becoming extremely competitive with mainstream Hollywood movies, leading to concern how Hollywood would become influenced by pornography to increase their chances for commercial success. 1970s adult films weren't even much different from feature films. They were more sort of artistically approached. Storylines were included with papers of dialogue, often followed by funky music. However, only location where such films could have been watched were adult movie theaters. You would buy a ticket and be surrounded by tens of other people while watching a projection of a 35mm hardcore film. People in the 1970s indeed experienced dramatic political scene or consequences of Vietnam War. Disco music became everyone's escapism from reality. Suddenly, teenagers did disco. Grandparents paid lesson classes to learn the hustle dance. Disco became so popular that it started marginalizing rock and roll. Rock singer Rod Stewart switched to disco, and even the Rolling Stones, after which they were called sellouts by other rockers. Nightclub called Studio 54 in the Midtown Manhattan became the most popular nightclub during the disco era. It gained popularity for extravagant events that included tons of drugs or 300 people having sexual activities on balcony. It was before people became aware of drugs addiction and before the AIDS pandemic took over 40 million lives. Letting yourself flow with the disco's catchy rhythms and pulsating beats, however, disappeared from the mainstream just as fast as it became popular. Disco became hated for some numerous reasons. Some felt it was too mechanical, while rockers feared that the rock music would die out because of disco popularity. Also, disco was associated with multicultural people of all sexualities, including gay people. In 1979, rock music fans organized a disco demolition night when 50,000 people blew up their disco records. Afterwards, disco sharply declined in popularity just as 1970s came to an end.